The laughter inside that courtroom still echoes in my head, sharp, cruel, and cold. My daughter-in-law stood there, chin high, voice steady, calling my son a failure before a room full of strangers. "He's nothing without me," she said, smirking. "He's lived off my family's money since the day we married." That was the moment my heart clenched, not because of what she said, but because Daniel didn't lift his eyes to defend himself. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, hands trembling on the wooden table like a scolded child. I hadn't even stepped inside yet. I stood by the heavy courtroom doors, listening, my hand gripping my cane so tight my knuckles turned white. She wasn't always like that, but I'll get to that part. My name is Irene Hollis, and I'm 68 years old. I've been a widow for nearly 20 years now. My husband, Richard, was a respected attorney in Houston, the kind of man who believed in fairness, in keeping your word, and in standing up straight no matter who tried to knock you down. After he passed, I raised our 2 children alone, worked as a school principal until my knees gave out and my hair turned silver. I thought I had done enough to earn peace in my later years. But peace, that's a fragile thing when people mistake kindness for weakness. Before I take you further, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because I want you to imagine yourself right there with me, standing in that hallway, hearing your own child's dignity being shredded in front of the world. That morning, Daniel had called me, voice shaking. "Mom, please don't come. It's just a procedural hearing. I'll be fine." I told him I'd stay home. I lied. Something in his voice told me he was anything but fine. And when I arrived and heard what was happening through those doors, I knew I had made the right choice. Inside, Tara's family sat like they owned the place. Her father, smug in his tailored suit, and her mother with that frozen smile only money can buy. Their lawyer strutted like a man paid to humiliate. Tara was dressed in white, always the dramatist, pretending to be the victim. "Your Honor," she said sweetly, "I supported Daniel for years. I covered his debts, his failures, his poor decisions. Now I'm simply asking for what's fair." Fair. That word stung. Daniel's lawyer, a timid young man who looked barely out of law school, fumbled through a folder. He tried to speak, but Tara's attorney cut him off at every turn. Daniel just sat there, head bowed, not daring to meet anyone's eyes. When the judge asked him to respond, his voice broke. "Your Honor, I don't want to fight her. She can have what she wants." The words sliced through me like glass. After everything the years he'd worked under her father, the long nights he spent trying to fix a business that was already drowning, he was ready to give up everything. I pushed the courtroom doors open quietly. The hinges creaked just enough for heads to turn. The bailiff straightened, confused, as I walked in small steps, steady, my cane tapping the marble floor like a heartbeat. Daniel's head lifted. His eyes widened. "Mom?" he whispered. Tara froze mid-sentence. And then the judge, an older man with a lined face and steady gaze, saw me. For a brief second, his expression shifted from stern to startled. His voice faltered when he spoke. Mrs. Hollis?" I nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." You could have heard a pin drop. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Tara's lawyer shuffled his notes. Tara's father leaned forward, recognition dawning because every lawyer in that courthouse knew my husband's name. Richard Hollis built half of their reputations, trained most of them, and scared the rest. But I didn't come to remind anyone of that. I came because my son was drowning, and sometimes a mother has to wade through the fire herself. I found an empty seat in the back, folded my hands, and listened. Tara continued her performance, tears, trembling voice, words rehearsed like lines from a script. She spoke about years of financial abuse and a husband incapable of responsibility. Her lawyer nodded dramatically at every sentence. I sat still, my face calm, my mind racing, because what none of them knew was that I'd spent the last 3 months quietly gathering records, documents, statements, and papers Daniel never knew existed. And every lie Tara uttered that morning only tightened the rope around her own story. The judge glanced my way again uneasily. He knew. He remembered the name Hollis not because of power, but because of justice. And in that moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even fear. As Tara finished, her lawyer said with a flourish, "Your Honor, it's clear Mrs. Tara Jennings has carried the burden of this marriage alone." That was when I rose from my seat, slowly but with purpose. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "I'd like to request permission to address the court as Daniel Hollis's mother." A murmur rippled through the room. Tara's head snapped toward me, her smile vanishing. The judge hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Mrs. Hollis, you may proceed." I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about truth and a promise I made to my husband before he died. If they ever come for what's ours, don't let them win through deceit. I looked at Tara, her painted face stiffening. "You say my son lived off your family's money," I said softly. "Would you like to tell the court where that money truly came from?" She blinked once, twice uncertain. And that's when the judge leaned back, eyes narrowing, as if he already knew this was no ordinary family matter. What none of them realized. Not Tara, not her smug lawyer, not even my trembling son was that I hadn't come empty-handed. Because when a mother walks into court carrying the truth, silence follows. I didn't always see Tara for what she truly was. When Daniel first brought her home nearly 6 years ago, I thought she was a blessing, the kind of young woman any mother would be proud to welcome into her family. Pretty, well-spoken, confident, with that polished smile that could charm a room full of strangers. She called me Mom before the wedding was even planned, and for a while I believed she meant it. Back then, Daniel was 34, quiet, thoughtful, maybe a little too trusting for his own good. He'd taken over part of his father's accounting work after Richard passed. Numbers, he understood. People, not so much. Tara, on the other hand, understood people all too well. She worked as a paralegal at her father's firm, Jennings Associates, one of those places where the name on the wall mattered more than the people who worked under it, the kind of firm that hosted charity galas and called it generosity. When she and Daniel met, it felt like light entering a dark room. He hadn't smiled that much in years. I saw hope in him again. I remember thinking maybe God finally sent someone to love my boy the way he deserves. But even blessings have shadows. After their engagement, things began to change, small things at first. She insisted they move closer to her parents, so Daniel could network more. I offered them part of our old property, a smaller house I'd rented out for years, but she smiled and said, "It's too far from downtown, Irene." She'd stopped calling me Mom by then. Subtle, but I noticed. After the wedding, Daniel started showing up less often. When he did, he was distracted, glancing at his phone every few minutes. "Work's busy," he'd say. But the way he said it, tired, careful, like every word was being weighed, told me something was off. Then came the first real crack. One Sunday, I called to invite them for dinner. Tara answered, voice sweet but distant. "Oh, we can't make it. Daniel's working on an important case with Dad." But when I passed by their house the next day to drop off some things, his car was parked outside, lights off, curtains drawn. He was home alone. I didn't confront him. I just left a note by his door that said, "If you ever need to talk, you know where I am." He didn't reply. Months went by like that. Tara began managing everything, their accounts, Daniel's schedule, even his friendships. She was smart. Too smart to make her control obvious. But I saw it in her tone, the way she'd say, "Daniel can't handle stress well, can he?" in front of people, like she was protecting him while quietly cutting him down. That's how manipulators work. They build you up only to remind you you're nothing without them. Daniel's confidence eroded. His calls became shorter, his eyes duller. The same boy who once stood tall beside his father now avoided making decisions without his wife's approval. Then one afternoon, I dropped by unexpectedly. Tara was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and irritated. "I told you if he doesn't sign it, my father can't push the deal through." When she turned and saw me, she nearly dropped the phone. "Oh, Irene, you startled me. I was just talking to my client." Her client, right? I didn't ask questions then, but a seed of suspicion took root. A few weeks later, Daniel came over looking defeated. He sat on my porch swing, rubbing his temples. "Mom," he said quietly, "Tara wants me to join her father's company full time. Says it'll secure our future." I asked him if he wanted to. He didn't answer, just looked away and said, "It's better if I do." That was the beginning of his downfall. Her father, a slick businessman named Victor Jennings, put Daniel in charge of handling accounts for a new investment venture. Only months later, that same venture was accused of embezzlement. And who did Victor blame? Daniel. Who testified against him? His own wife. The betrayal broke him completely. By the time the legal storm settled, Daniel had lost his job, his reputation, and every ounce of self-worth. Tara moved back to her parents' house, saying she needed time to think. Within weeks, she filed for divorce, claiming financial abuse and emotional neglect. Daniel didn't fight back. He couldn't. He was too tired, too ashamed, too convinced that everything was somehow his fault. I tried to comfort him, but he pushed me away. "Mom, please, just let it go. I made my choices." I remember sitting at the kitchen table after he left, staring at the empty coffee cup he'd used lipstick smudged on the rim from Tara's last visit months before. A strange, final kind of silence filled the house. That night, I took out one of Richard's old briefcases, the one with the brass locks. Inside were years of files, deeds, and letters he'd written before his passing. Among them was a folder labeled Daniel's Trust. At first, I thought it was just sentimental, but as I read through the pages, my hands began to tremble. Richard had set up a legal trust in Daniel's name years ago, untouched, untied to any marital assets, protected by law, a safety net in case life ever turned cruel. And life had turned cruel, indeed. That was when I realized something. Tara and her family weren't just trying to win a divorce. They were trying to take what wasn't theirs, what belonged to my husband's legacy and my son's future. I closed that briefcase, locked it again, and whispered to the empty room, "Not this time. You won't destroy him, not like this." From that night on, I stopped feeling helpless. Because when you've spent decades raising a family alone, silence stops being a weakness. It becomes a weapon. And I was ready to use it. It all unraveled faster than anyone expected. Within 3 months of joining Tara's father's firm, Daniel was accused of financial misconduct. The newspapers didn't bother with details, they just printed his name in bold, alongside words like fraud, mismanagement, and betrayal of trust. For a man who'd once been known for honesty, that kind of headline cuts deep. When I read it, I dropped my cup of tea right there on the kitchen floor. The porcelain shattered, but I didn't even notice. I just stared at the paper, my son's face blurred under ink and lies. I drove to his apartment that same day. The curtains were drawn, and I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in that quiet, heavy air. Daniel sat at the table, head down, surrounded by unopened mail and legal documents. His eyes were red, his beard grown, his shoulders sagging like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He looked up when I entered, startled. "Mom, you shouldn't be here." "Then where should I be?" I asked softly. "While they tear you apart." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They think I took money that went missing from the firm, but I didn't even touch those accounts." He exhaled shakily. "Tara testified that I handled all the finances, said I insisted on managing everything myself." "Did you?" He shook his head. "Her father told me to sign some reports. I didn't know they were already altered. Now the auditors say my signature means I approved everything." My heart broke right there. They'd set him up neatly, completely. I wanted to storm into that firm and tear their lies apart with my bare hands. But Daniel's next words stopped me cold. "Please, Mom," he said quietly, "don't get involved. I can't stand the thought of you being dragged into this." He still thought he could protect me. even now. That's when I realized he was too gentle for this world. Days turned into weeks. The firm pushed for criminal charges, but somehow the case settled privately. That's when Tara filed for divorce, claiming Daniel had become unstable and verbally abusive. She requested sole ownership of their home and demanded compensation for emotional distress. Every sentence she filed was another nail in the coffin of the man I raised. I sat in the back of the courtroom during the early hearings, quiet, unnoticed. I listened as she cried on cue, as her father nodded solemnly beside her, as her lawyer painted my son like some reckless child who'd ruined her life. And Daniel, he just stood there, hollow-eyed, accepting it all like he deserved it. One afternoon after court, I caught him sitting alone on a bench outside. The sun was setting behind the courthouse, painting everything gold except him. He was gray. He said, "Mom, I just want this over with. I'll give her whatever she wants." I asked, "Even your father's name?" He looked at me, tears welling up. If that's what it takes for her to leave me in peace. That broke something inside me. When I went home that night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too big, too quiet. I kept walking from room to room, thinking about Richard, what he would have done. He'd always been methodical, never rushed, never loud. Truth doesn't need to shout, he used to tell me. It just needs to be prepared. That's when I unlocked the old cabinet in his study again. Inside were folders labeled meticulously in his handwriting, property deeds, trust documents, letters to old clients, and then, tucked between them, I found something I'd never noticed before, a notarized statement, signed by Richard and his law partner, confirming the creation of the Hollis Family Trust. The trust was airtight, legally protected from external claims, including marital property disputes. Daniel had no idea it even existed because Richard had planned to tell him only when he was ready to handle responsibility. Well, now he needed it. The next morning, I called one of Richard's oldest friends, a retired judge named Harold Bennett. He still lived in Houston. When I told him what was happening, there was a pause on the line, followed by a sigh. "Irene," he said, "I knew this day might come. Richard was cautious for a reason. Bring me the papers. I'll take a look." When I drove over, he reviewed every page, his eyes narrowing. "This trust is bulletproof," he said finally. "No court in Texas can touch it, and certainly not her family. Whoever's advising her doesn't know what they're walking into." He flipped through the divorce filings Tara's lawyer had submitted, shaking his head. "They're making their case look like Daniel lived off her money, but if this trust existed, it's clear she benefited from his inheritance all along." My chest tightened. "So what should I do?" "Be patient," he said. "Don't reveal this too soon. Let them build their lies, and then you bring the truth down like a hammer." That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the papers spread across the wood like a battlefield. For the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt steady, focused. I began organizing everything: photocopies, notarized seals, financial ledgers from Richard's records. By dawn, my living room looked like a miniature law office. I labeled each folder: trust, assets, timeline, statements. And at the very top, I placed a single sheet of paper, my husband's handwriting faded but firm. "If ever you must defend what's rightfully ours, remember, truth waits quietly until it's needed." When Daniel called that morning, I didn't tell him what I was doing. He sounded exhausted. "Mom, tomorrow's the final hearing. Don't come, please." "I won't," I said softly, looking right at the stack of documents before me. But I already knew I would, because sometimes a mother's silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. Sleep became a stranger to me after that night. Every tick of the clock sounded like a countdown not to destruction, but to revelation. I spent the next few days living between stacks of papers, envelopes, and old memories. My dining table turned into a war room, and I was the quiet general who'd finally decided she'd had enough. I reread every page Richard had left behind. My husband had always believed in order. He labeled everything like he knew I'd need it someday. Property titles, tax receipts, witness letters, even a sealed envelope marked "Private for Irene only." I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "If they ever come for Daniel, trust the truth you already have and don't let fear make you quiet." I sat there trembling, running my fingers over his words. He had always known. Maybe not this exact battle, but he'd known there'd come a day when someone would try to steal what wasn't theirs. That letter became my armor. Over the next week, I reviewed the trust documents line by line. It clearly stated that all assets under the Hollis name, including the house, the joint business shares, and inherited funds, were owned through a protected trust established before Daniel's marriage. The law couldn't touch it. Which meant every asset Tara claimed she financed was actually part of my late husband's estate. I called Judge Bennett again, Richard's old friend. "Harold," I said, "would the court accept these documents as new evidence?" He replied carefully, "If you can prove they're original and relevant, yes. But timing matters. Wait until the right moment, preferably during the final hearing, when her lawyer feels most confident." I could almost hear him smile through the phone. "Let them fall into their own trap, Irene. You'll know when to walk in." I thanked him, then added quietly, "Harold, one more thing. Do you know who's presiding over Daniel's case?" He paused. "Judge Maxwell." The name made my stomach tighten. I knew that man. Years ago, when Richard was still alive, Maxwell had been a young attorney caught in a serious ethics scandal one Richard quietly helped resolve behind closed doors. It saved Maxwell's career, and though my husband never asked for favors in return, men like Maxwell never forget debts. No wonder he froze when he saw me later. That week, I kept everything to myself. Daniel thought I was staying home, resting. He had no idea I'd spent every day at the county clerk's office getting copies certified, notarized, sealed in triplicate. I wanted no loopholes, no surprises. I even found a copy of Tara and Daniel's marriage certificate, dated after the trust was filed. That small detail alone was powerful enough to crush her claims. By Friday, everything was ready. I ironed my clothes that night, a simple gray dress, the same one I wore at Richard's memorial, not out of nostalgia but symbolism. I wanted to walk into that courtroom not as a weeping widow or frail mother, but as the last representative of Richard Hollis's integrity. That morning, I arrived early. The courthouse looked exactly as I remembered it from years ago. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, high ceilings echoing with footsteps, the faint scent of old paper and coffee. I stood outside the courtroom doors, watching lawyers rush in and out on with their files, all pretending to control fate. Through the small window in the door, I saw Daniel sitting at the front, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor. Tara was across the aisle, dressed like she was attending a red carpet event. Pale suit, pearl earrings, her mother fussing beside her. Her lawyer, a tall man with slicked hair and too much confidence, was whispering instructions. They thought they'd already won. I waited. Timing, Harold had said. Let them talk first. Let them build their arrogance sky high. As the bailiff called the session to order, I took a slow breath and placed the folder under my arm. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about restoration. My son's name, my husband's legacy, my family's dignity. When the judge entered, I stayed behind the door a moment longer. I could hear Tara's lawyer beginning his statement, smug, rehearsed. Your Honor, my client has endured years of financial manipulation and emotional hardship. He paused dramatically. She seeks equitable division of assets to regain her independence after being burdened by Mr. Hollis's financial instability. I closed my eyes and whispered, now. I pushed the door open. The room fell quiet as my cane tapped across the floor. The sound echoed deliberate, steady. The bailiff's eyes widened slightly, then he stepped aside. Daniel turned around, confusion written all over his face. Mom? Tara's confident smile faltered for the first time. The judge. Maxwell looked up from his papers, saw me, and froze mid-motion. His pen dropped onto the desk with a soft click. Mrs. Hollis? He stammered, voice unsteady. I nodded politely. Good morning, Your Honor. My apologies for the delay. You could have heard a feather fall. Even Tara's lawyer hesitated before continuing. Mrs. Hollis, this is a closed hearing, he said sharply. I met his eyes. Then you'll want to reopen it once you see what I'm carrying. Judge Maxwell leaned forward, hands clasped. His face paled slightly. Bailiff, allow her to present her documents. I walked slowly toward the bench, my folder pressed firmly in my hands. Every step felt like years of silence breaking open. Daniel whispered, Mom, what are you doing? I didn't answer, I just placed the folder before the judge. These, I said softly, are the original trust documents signed by my late husband, Attorney Richard Hollis, verified, notarized, and protected by Texas state law. They concern the ownership of every property and asset listed in these proceedings. Tara blinked rapidly, her lawyer fumbling for composure. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Judge Maxwell raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Harper. He turned to me, voice steady but eyes heavy with recognition. Mrs. Hollis, I assume you know what this means. Yes, Your Honor, I said quietly. It means my son doesn't owe anyone a dime, and that this courtroom has been fed a web of lies. Tara's face drained of color. Her father shifted uneasily in his seat. And though no one spoke for a moment, the silence was deafening. Because in that silence, truth had finally entered the room. The moment my words settled in the air, everything stopped. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder, like the room itself knew something had shifted. The judge stared at me, his pen motionless, his fingers twitching slightly as if torn between duty and disbelief. Mrs. Hollis, he said finally, his voice lower now. You understand that introducing new evidence at this stage is highly unusual. I nodded. I understand, Your Honor, but the truth doesn't always follow the court's schedule. A small murmur spread through the room. Tara leaned toward her lawyer, whispering harshly. Her father's confident expression had turned stiff, his jaw clenching with every passing second. Daniel just sat frozen beside his attorney, looking from me to the judge, confusion and relief warring on his face. Judge Maxwell cleared his throat. Bailiff, please collect the documents. As the bailiff carried the folder to the bench, Tara's lawyer stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. These materials haven't been verified or disclosed prior to this session. They're inadmissible unless... Maxwell cut him off. I said, sit down, Mr. Harper. I'll decide admissibility. The young man faltered and obeyed. The judge opened the folder, flipping through the first few pages. His eyes darted rapidly from one seal to the next, pausing when he reached the notarized statement with my husband's signature. His face softened. Richard Hollis, he said under his breath. I'll be damned. Then he looked back at me. I remember this trust. A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom. Tara's lawyer turned pale. The judge continued, his tone now respectful. This document predates your son's marriage by several years. It clearly establishes that the assets in question belong solely to the Hollis Family Trust, which places them outside the reach of community property laws. Tara blinked rapidly. That can't be true, she muttered. Her lawyer stood again. Your Honor, this is... Maxwell held up a hand. Mr. Harper, unless you can refute notarized, time-stamped legal evidence signed by 2 witnesses, I'd suggest you sit down before I cite you for contempt. For a long, heavy moment, the only sound was the faint turning of paper as the judge read. I could see Tara's confidence crumble, her face paling under the harsh courtroom lights. Her mother reached over to squeeze her hand, but she jerked away. Daniel turned toward me, eyes glistening. Mom, he whispered, voice shaking. How did you find all this? I gave him a small, steady smile. Your father left you more than memories, son. He left you protection. The judge cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Hollis," he said, "these documents also include a schedule of disbursements. Am I correct in reading that the home Mrs. Jennings currently occupies was purchased entirely through this trust?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "And the renovation funds she claimed to have paid from her own savings. Those came directly from a withdrawal authorized by my husband before his passing." Tara's lawyer fumbled with his notes, trying to regain footing. "Even if that's true," he said quickly, "my client contributed her labor, her emotional investment. Emotional investment doesn't entitle one to someone else's inheritance," I interrupted softly but firmly. The courtroom went silent again. Judge Maxwell looked down at his notes, then up at Tara. "Mrs. Jennings, would you like to respond?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. I wasn't aware of these documents," she said weakly. The judge's gaze hardened. "You testified under oath that all assets were marital property. Are you telling me you made that statement without verifying their origin?" I relied on my attorney's advice." Mr. Harper's face flushed deep red. "Your Honor, we were given incomplete information." "Or you didn't bother to check," Maxwell snapped. "And now you've dragged this court through weeks of false claims." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Jennings, do you realize the severity of perjury?" Tara's lips parted, but no words came out. Her father shifted uncomfortably beside her. That's when I decided to deliver the final blow. "Your Honor," I said, "there's one more piece of evidence." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a small flash drive, placing it on the table in front of the bailiff. "These are voice recordings from Daniel's phone, saved automatically to his cloud. They include several conversations between Mr. Victor Jennings and my son. In them, you'll hear explicit instructions to sign documents that later led to Daniel's alleged mismanagement." Gasps filled the room. Tara's father's composure shattered. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You can't—" But the judge had already gestured to the bailiff. "Play it." The first audio crackled through the speakers. Then came Victor's unmistakable voice. "Don't worry about the numbers, Daniel. Just sign the papers. I'll take care of the rest. If anything goes wrong, it's on me, not you." And then, seconds later, Tara's voice, cold, sharp, recorded in the background. "Just sign it, Daniel. My father knows what he's doing. You're making this harder than it has to be." When the recording ended, the silence was thicker than before. The judge removed his glasses slowly. "Mrs. Hollis," he said quietly, "how long have you had these?" 3 weeks, Your Honor. My son had forgotten they backed up automatically. I only accessed them when his old phone wouldn't stop syncing." He nodded solemnly. "Then it seems this court owes your family more than an apology." "Aha!" He turned to Tara and her father. "Mrs. Jennings, Mr. Jennings, I strongly advise you to speak to your counsel about your next words, because from where I sit, this looks like attempted fraud, perjury, and coercion." Tara's lawyer sank into his chair. Her father's face turned beet red. I looked at Daniel. For the first time in months, his posture straightened. He looked up, not as a broken man, but as his father's son. Judge Maxwell took a deep breath and addressed the room. "Court will recess for 30 minutes while I review this new evidence." He rose from his chair, then paused. His eyes met mine. "Mrs. Hollis," he said quietly, almost respectfully, "it's good to see you again. You've done justice proud today." I nodded once, my voice steady. "So did you, Your Honor." As he left the bench, Tara buried her face in her hands. Her lawyer whispered frantically. Her father glared toward me, but none of it mattered, because for the first time in a long, long while, the truth was finally speaking, and it was louder than their lies. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. He reviewed my husband's trust, the recordings, and then looked at Tara and her father. "This court has been deceived," he said coldly. "Mr. Hollis, you are cleared of all accusations." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Tara tried to protest, but the judge cut her off. Her lies had collapsed in front of everyone. The gavel struck, ending it all. Outside, Daniel whispered, "Mom, you saved me." I smiled softly. No, son. Truth did. Days later, headlines cleared his name while Tara's family faced investigation. Daniel finally slept in peace. Justice didn't roar that day. It walked in quietly, steady as a mother's love, and when it spoke, no one dared interrupt.